All right. So in the tutorials, I found that people had not really, by and large, had not really been able to um, wrap their heads around the Lombard reading. And honestly, there are only two important takeaways from that. One is uh, the title of the piece, which creates a distinction between knowledge and ideology. And of course, what he means is the idea of knowledge as something deep and complex and honest. And ideology is like an ism. Ideology is something very specific, narrow, and most importantly, agenda driven. हम जब पाकिस्तान की आइडियोलॉजी के बारे में बात करते हैं, टू नेशन थियोरी के बारे में बात करते हैं, it's a very, very specific story that is the justification for the country of Pakistan to exist, right? So it has a very clear agenda. Ideologies are like that. So communism and socialism have ideologies, right? Communism is an ideology because it is a worldview that is committed to furthering a particular agenda. And in the case of communism, the agenda is the removal of social class, right? And socio-economic equality, which is a great agenda. But when you become wedded to a single agenda without thinking about it, and thinking about it critically, you can get into trouble. Yes, Sarin, you have a question.
Yes, miss, I'm a bit confused. Ideology is the removal of the social classes, or ideology is communism and the...
Communism has an ideology, right? Which is the removal of social classes. I'm giving you an
Okay.
example of different types of ideologies. Can you think of one now that I have you here, Sarin?
No,
An
I'm sorry.
ideology is a very modern thing.
I guess religion.
तो लंबार्ड यही तो कह रहे हैं that religion used to be something much, much bigger and wider, but in the modern era, it has been reduced to an ideology. Jyoti?
There are a lot of terrorist group based on an ideology that, the world, they have an ideology that the world should be according to their opinion and what their view is of the world. So a lot of the terrorist groups are made on a specific ideology and people just join if they think that's right.
So, how does that work? Why is that problematic?
It's problematic because it's extremism. I mean, you just can't, that's not a logical way of doing things. That's just some people manipulating a very good way of living into a very extremist way. And that's how we see so much hatred towards humanity and towards like a certain kind of lifestyle.
ठीक है, तो जब हम एक्सट्रीम्स की बात करते हैं, हम क्या कह रहे हैं? हम बेसिकली ये कह रहे हैं that when you become committed to a narrow or extreme version of a world view, what you do is you cut off the possibility of even listening to and thinking about other variations. You become rigid and single-minded. ये है मसला. Ideologies make you rigid and single-minded. Knowledge makes you broad-minded and reflective. That's what Lombard is basically trying to say. Okay, I have some hands up. Do me a favor, sometimes this computer of mine, if I open the chat or the participant list, it creates a blank square on the screen. Can you guys see the full slide or are there any blank squares on the screen?
Yes, we can see the full slide.
Okay, awesome. Rania.
Miss, so we discussed how we shouldn't use isms when referring to religions because they're such a broad concept, right? So when extremist groups take certain bits of religion and only focus on those bits but not the rest of the religion, then does the religion become an ism then, or is it just is it just those
It
ideologies?
becomes extremism.
Yeah, so it's an ism then
Yeah.
in that aspect. Yeah.
G Sarin.
Yeah, Miss, I also wanted to point out that there was one of the students just said that you don't think logically, and that's why
G.
it becomes a problem. But that's I don't think that's the issue, because logic is a bit of a subject. I would even say it might seem a bit subjective because of the knowledge you are limited to. So you would feel that it's logical, but it's just limiting of knowledge, and I think that's something I want to
Thank you.
point
That's
out.
a very important corrective. So it's not about being logical or rational only, it is about being open to different points of view so that you can really get at truth, which is always a complex thing. Ji Mohammed Ali.
आप आवाज आ रही है मेरी?
Ji.
तो लंबार्ड रीडिंग के अंदर आपने अभी सवाल किया था कि वो जो एक चल रहा है, एक सिलसिला चल रहा है कि एक ट्रेंड चल रहा है कि वो मतलब मुसलमान जिस तरह का कर रहे हैं तो वो क्यों नुकसानदेह है। तो उसने लंबार्ड ने दो बेसिकली डिस्टिंक्शंस दिखाता है कि एक एक तरफ आते हैं, जिस तरह एग्जांपल देता है सर सैयद अहमद खान की, और एक तरफ एग्जांपल देता है फंडामेंटलिस्ट्स की, जिन्होंने एक तरफ सर सैयद अहमद खान ने अपने उनको बिल्कुल ना अंग्रेजों के और मॉडर्निटी के बिल्कुल अपने आप को सरेंडर करके अपनी वो उन्होंने जो थी ना तालीमात को वो कर लें छोड़ दिया। और जो दूसरे फंडामेंटलिस्ट थे उन्होंने बहुत लिटरल इंटरप्रिटेशंस और उसके साथ करके ना अपनी एक आइडियोलॉजीज बेसिकली उन दोनों ने अडॉप्ट किया। तो उसमें फिर आके मुसलमानों का डिक्लाइन हुआ, इंटेलेक्चुअल डिक्लाइन हुआ, और उनकी कह लें एक इंटेलेक्चुअल और स्पिरिचुअल डिक्लाइन भी साथ साथ हुआ। और उन्होंने तसव्वुफ के बारे में जो बात की है वो ये है कि एक जो सूफी हजरात करते क्या है, उनका एक वो हार्ट के बारे में जो बात है कि वो अपने दिल के अंदर ही ना मतलब इंस्टेड ऑफ डूइंग गुड एक्शंस वो अपने अंदर अच्छाई को इस तरह लेके आते हैं कि वो मतलब जो काम करेंगे ना वो अच्छा अंदर लेके आते हैं ना, अपने दिल के अंदर वो अच्छाई जज्ब करते हैं कि उनके हर एक्शंस में वो निकलती है।
Thanks, Sarim. So actually, you opened up the way to a question I wanted to ask. There was actually a question posed in one of the tutorials which I couldn't get to, but मुझे लगा कि ये पूरी क्लास के लिए अच्छा सवाल होगा. I want one of you to address it. So the student asked that the reading says, while explaining Ehsan, that Ehsan is to do everything with beauty, right? To make beautiful whatever your thought, feeling, or action is, including killing, right? Even if you have to kill, do it beautifully. And their question was, how can you kill beautifully? So, does anybody have any sense? Yes, Sarah.
I think what that reminds me of is kind of the principles of I don't know if it's specifically jihad or I guess it is jihad, but the principles say that if you capture prisoners, you treat them with respect, and if they know they have some knowledge, so they can teach your children or anyone, so you take advantage of that knowledge and make them teachers if they can give you something that you don't have. And it says to protect women and children as well as temples. So even if you're at war with a particular nation or So even then, there are you can do it with some principles, and the principles of respect which
Sure.
are.
Actually, that's a good example, but it doesn't quite speak to the question about killing. Sana?
I don't know if this is exactly applicable, but it kind of reminds me of the little rules that we have when we have Bakra Eid. And we're told that, every time you slaughter an animal, you need to make sure that there's not multiple cuts on the neck, and that it needs to be one clean cut in which the animal passes away. And a lot of the times we see in our homes and in other, in other slaughters that animals would be trying to run away, and we've seen videos of those. So I mean, it kind of goes against what we're taught. And even though they are animals, and it's not applicable directly to killing, like killing in terms of what terrorist organizations do, but then it's about killing the innocent.
I
And
think,
animals in
yeah, I think you've understood. The reference is definitely to the slaughter of animals and perhaps the execution,
yeah.
the legal execution of prisoners. Vanya?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. That's like Asana pretty much covered it, but
Okay,
yeah, yeah.
all right. Momina?
So what I recall from the reading as well was that when they say, when they're talking about living beautifully, they're also, it means that you live as per the commandments that are there in Islam specifically, or the teachings of God. So basically, I think even killing beautifully would mean that you kill as long as it's lawful and it's as per the commandments of
Okay, okay. So that's one sort of language to use, and that's the very modern language that we use in Islam, to follow God's commandments, to do it lawfully. So it's all about rules, commandments, and law. But ihsan goes so much deeper, right? That you can maybe be actually acting according to the rules and the law, but that does not make ihsan. Amna?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like Sana just said, this sort of reminded me how we are always told that even if you like killing like bugs, right? So kill them in a way that they don't suffer, right? So it just
Right. So there is a certain set of values associated with everything that you're saying, right? Can we maybe we should try to name the values? What are the qualities involved in killing with ihsan?
perhaps kill in a way that you don't find like pleasure in, I suppose, or the other being does not suffer, I guess.
Good, good. Okay. So there's many hands, so I'm going to go through you quickly. Ayaz,
I think that जो भी आप
आवाज नहीं आ रही बेटा.
ओके अब आवाज आ रही है
Little better, but it's very faint.
फिर मैं बार बार करूंगा
Beta, I can't hear you. Chat में लिख दो. Sorry.
okay I will
That's
talk
better.
little
No,
bit.
no, I can hear you. Go on. Huh.
Okay, it's fine now.
Yeah.
I think before slaughtering as we do in our ritual in the religious ritual, तो वो कहते हैं कि अब देखना पड़ेगा कि मतलब वो तो नहीं है प्रेग्नेंट तो नहीं है और इसी तरह हम देखते हैं कि हमारे इलाके में कुछ लोग आते हैं जो शिकार करते हैं परिंदों का तो सॉरी रेबिट का तो उनमें से एक ऐसा होता है सीजन के वो रेबिट जो होते हैं वो उनके अंदर पेट के अंदर बच्चे होते हैं तो ज़्यादातर लोग they are not aware कि ये भी वो होते हैं प्रेग्नेंट वो बाहर से आकर भी शिकार करने लगे तो I think ऐसा
Yeah. So very quickly, Ifra and then Sarim, and then I will jump in.
Hi. So this reminded me of the Battle of Khandaq, the concept of ihsan in war, when the Muslims where there was a man like from the enemy side who was really strong. His name was, I guess, Amr, and he was like really strong, and only Hazrat Ali came forward to fight this man. And then there was this fierce fight, and at last Hazrat Ali, he threw Amr down onto the ground, and then he mounted his chest and he was ready to kill him. And just as Hazrat Ali was about to kill him, the enemy, he spat on Hazrat Ali's face, and now everyone was certain that he's going to kill him. But Hazrat Ali, he stepped back, because now he was like, if I kill you now, that will be a personal grudge, because now you have spat on me. That's when Hazrat Ali, he controlled in anger, and then when afterwards he killed him, it was just like purely for the sake of Allah. So basically, the quality of not letting your own grudges come between the war.
It's a lovely story
Yes.
and good example. So let's try to get beyond things like according to Islamic commandments, purely for the sake of Allah, because those are very abstract words, right? So just as you could talk about anger and grudges, let us talk about the positive emotions and values that are associated with behaving with ihsan. Sarim?
Yeah, so in the previous reading, we discussed how love was a very important attribute. So I assume that would be doing it for the love of God and like doing it for the love of your people and not out of hate, understanding that this is necessary, doing it in a just manner, doing it in an honorable manner.
ठीक है, exactly. So if we go back to animal, मतलब कुर्बानी पे अगर वापस आ जाएं और बस जानवर को हलाल करने पे ही आ जाएं, it's something that is accepted as part of the natural order. The human being is an omnivore. The human being eats meat and plant foods. But there are ways to eat meat. So, what are the qualities and the values that we must have in front of us? Mercy, right? Mercy and kindness, so that suffering is minimal. There's no reason for that animal to suffer. Um, Hygiene and cleanliness. Um, Many of you talked about a swift killing, so that requires the butcher to be highly skilled. There's a skill level associated with doing it properly, so that not only does the animal not suffer, but all the blood drains out properly and well for the purposes of hygiene. You do it in a place where it is clean and hygienic and does not impinge on is not inconsiderate of your neighbors or other people, unlike what we do on Bakr, right? So, keeping in mind all of these things, at the end of the day, you might even say it comes down to love, because it comes down to caring about every aspect of the deed and not causing any harm to anybody, including the animal. And also taking, being very seriously committed and devoted to your craft. We never think of the butcher as a craftsman, but he is. He even, and now too, there is a certain knowledge that he has, there is a certain hand skill that he has, which he has learned and which he has perfected over years and years of practice. So he is a craftsman just like a jeweler is a craftsman. And all craftsmen undertake their craft with seriousness. They take this is a God-given skill which they respect. And so they use their own skill with respect for the skill. There's no, to do it with ihsan is to fully concentrate and do your best and bring the maximum amount of skill to the task. You can't be distracted. You can't be just saying, oh God, that's like my 210 cow of the day. I'm just done. I need to go home. That's when you're not practicing with ihsan. All right. And please do keep thinking about it. It should be a lifelong reflection. But we can't carry on talking about it in the class. We have too much else to cover. This is just, I'm starting here because I just want you to have a timeline in front of your face, which you will get, that covers what we more or less call the classical period of Islam. As you know, 1258 is the great rupture caused by the Mongol invasions. But within 100 years, the Mongols in the Middle East and Persia themselves become Muslim, and then they actually take it very seriously and become great patrons of Islamic learning. And nor do they persecute Muslims for being Muslim, even right after 1258. Yes, they take charge by getting rid of the caliphate, but other than that, they leave people alone, particularly craftsmen. There's a big respect for men who have craft and skill in making stuff. So engineers and builders and architects and potters and brickmakers, and these people were considered valuable. So they, remained alive and well. Okay, so as you know, come back here, look at the book. From the prophetic age onwards, there is a kind of, there's an expansion that characterizes the history of Islam. The Prophet himself going from his immediate family to a greater community in Mecca, to Medina, to the tribes of Arabia, to finally conquering Mecca and the Quraysh and uniting all of the Arab tribes. When you come to the period of the Philippi Rashidun, what are they doing? They're consolidating what they have inherited from the Prophet, but they're continuing to expand out of the Arabian Peninsula. Umayyads, highest, fastest expansion. It's in the Umayyad times that you get all the way to Sindh in the east and Spain in the west. The Abbasids on a smaller level continue, aista aista. And in the Abbasid Empire, the kind of expansion you see is more a consolidating kind of expansion. They invest a lot of time in expanding and patronizing and developing knowledge. So when we think of the expansiveness of all of pre-modern Islamic civilization, it's a multi-level, multi-pronged expansiveness, always looking outward, conquering new territories, which brings you economic capital, conquering new populations, which brings you human resources and socio-political and cultural capital. But here's the most important, the one that we never think about: ideas. There was such a thing that was recognized as cultural and intellectual capital. For instance, right in the beginning, when not even under the Umayyads, but under Hazrat Umar and later Ali, the Persian Empire, the Sasanian Persian Empire was fully conquered. They found a lot of interesting things there: libraries, universities, and the first ever known hospital that was like a modern hospital. It was in a Persian city called Jundishapur. And the Arab Muslims did not do what, say, the Mongols may have done or others may have done. They felt that this was an amazing kind of war booty. हाँ, gold तो मिल गया treasury से, land भी मिल गया, skilled labor भी मिल गया, but this kind of treasury of scientific medical knowledge, that was the jackpot. And so they invested heavily in protecting and developing the work being done by the scientists and doctors in Jundishapur. So that kind of thing was very much part of the value system of Islamic civilization, that wherever new ideas and new knowledge was encountered, it was considered a treasure that has been found and must be absorbed and amalgamated into the growing Islamic civilization. As some of you may well know, under the Umayyads and then also later the Abbasids, there was an enormous court-sponsored translation program, because when they arrived in these more sophisticated lands of of Byzantium and Persia, as I said, they found universities and libraries and scientific centers, and the men who worked there, right, and the intellectuals who ran these things, as well as all their books, which were by and large in ancient Persian, in Greek, and Latin. They wanted to know what all this interesting knowledge was. And so they set about creating these very well-funded translation institutes that were actually part of palace offices, where a bunch of people would be employed. The the Byzantines and the Persians would be learning Arabic. Arab scholars would be learning Persian and Greek and Latin, and together they worked on recording all of what they found into Arabic editions. And eventually these Arabic editions of ancient knowledge, especially Greek philosophy and Greek science, really only were preserved through the work that was done on these sciences by Muslim scholars in Arabic. And it was in Arabic that the works of Plato and Aristotle and other people went back to Europe via Muslim Spain. So the European Renaissance in the 16th century, well, it started around the 13th. The European narrative is that we reawoke from our dark ages because we rediscovered our ancient intellectual heritage, which is the heritage of the Greeks and the Romans. But actually, they hadn't preserved it, because in medieval times, the Christian church found it all kafir and heathen and burnt it and threw it away. And so the only way it actually came back to Europe was through the Arabic editions. So what does it mean to have this expansive attitude generally? Territory bhi expand ho rahi hai, or population bhi expand ho raha hai, or ummah bhi बढ़ rahi hai, or ideas of knowledge bhi बढ़ raha hai. It meant that Islamic tradition continued to develop and evolve and grow. Now think about this. Look at these words: expand, develop, evolve, grow. And think about the words that we use to describe the same thing in modern times. Hinduism mix ho gayi. Authentic religion adulterate ho gaya. It's actually this new value judgment that we placed on a natural process of development and evolution. Muslims engaged with new ideas which they encountered as they moved into new lands, and they absorbed new cultures. And here's the interesting and important part, right? They were not threatened by these other ideas, right? There was no sense of, I'm sure you all have elders in your family, and so do I, who sit around at, I don't know, at mehendis during a wedding and say, oh, ye to sari rasmein Hinduana hai. Acha bhai hongi. Why is that threatening? It's only threatening in the modern era, post-colonialism, when we have become politically, economically, and socially threatened and an underdog. But when the Muslim community was the dominant civilization of the world, nothing was threatening. All ideas were welcome. They were going to, use them and absorb them. They felt superior to the new ideas. The new ideas were things that would be put into the service of Islam. They were confident that they could take what was good and useful and make it into an organic part of the growing and dynamic tradition launched by Muhammad in the Quran. They also believed that whatever was good and useful in the world ultimately came from God. So you didn't need to draw these lines of kya ye Islami knowledge hai ya nahi hai. Growth and evolution are not comfortable words for us moderns when we think about religion, because modern people want an authentic religion that is faithful to its original teachings and does not stray from the origins and does not become adulterated by outside ideas. Right? After colonialism, Muslims become afraid of ideas which they decide are not properly Islamic. And Islami or Islamic becomes an adjective, a way to categorize people, actions, values, and beliefs as being within the bounds of a definable box called Islam. Sorry. In pre-modern times, Muslim intellectuals centered all their ideas and writings firmly in the Quran and Sunnah. There's very little you'll read that doesn't engage directly with the original texts. Why? Because everybody was well-versed and well-educated in those texts. They investigated, analyzed, and assessed all the intellectual capital coming from sources other than Muhammad and folded the new ideas into the larger Islamic worldview, exactly the same way as they embraced new land and new markets and new technology and new Muslims, same way they embraced new ideas. Why were they able to do this? Because they believed that Islam is universal. Universal का लफ्ज़ कहाँ से आता है? From uni, one, unite, unify, universal. For all peoples, all places, all times, and all situations, right? So if Islam is universal, how can it be a category or a box with simplistically defined limits? The differences of opinion among Muhammad's followers were more or less acceptable to most Muslims because of this universalist outlook. It's not something I want to get into, just to say that even though there was a lot of difference of opinion, there was argument and debate, there was also a lot of exchange of ideas. The modern era, we have even stopped talking to each other openly and honestly. We have stopped exchanging ideas amongst different types of Muslims. Difference of opinion has become a hated and frightening thing. This is an important quick overview of the basic Islamic sciences or fields of knowledge. I have pooled them together in the way that they would be. There's the basis. You have all your Quranic sciences, language, grammar, the instances of revelation, commentaries, hadith, fiqh, kalam. Kalam is the Arabic word for a particular branch of philosophy which was dedicated to philosophizing about the nature of the universe as picking up from clues in the Quran. Why did you need a science of kalam? Because it was very clear to early Muslims that the Quran is not always straightforward and explicit. Many things are hinted at or explained in a metaphorical way. So our job is to use our God-given intellect and think about what it means. Alongside kalam was the wider field of falsafa or philosophy, which included logic, rhetoric, natural sciences, mathematics, and astronomy. So philosophy actually more or less meant the natural sciences and the study of the natural world. And then you had two other related branches of knowledge. Adab. अब अगर मैं आपसे अभी पूछूं कि अदब के क्या मायने हैं, आप या तो कहेंगे रिस्पेक्ट या आप कहेंगे लिटरेचर. फिर आप ज़रा एक मिनट रुक के सोचें कि लिटरेचर और रिस्पेक्ट के लिए एक लफ्ज़ क्यों है? Why does adab mean two such very different things? Because actually, historically, these were not very different things. Literary texts were meant to teach you morality and correct behavior. So you studied genres of akhlaq or ethics, history, poetry, aesthetics, and very related to other was the field or science of tasawwuf, which was dedicated to the purification of the heart and soul, how to reflect, how to meditate, and how to gain experiential knowledge of reality. Very hard to understand. Okay, we've got a lot going on in the chat. Hiba, because we associate literacy with good behavior, not literacy. Literacy just means कि आपको अपनी अलिफ बे या ABC आती है और आप cat, dog और अनार पढ़ सकते हैं. Literary texts are texts like poetry that are works of art, that use language as the material for creating art. In the modern day, short stories and novels are also part of this word art. In painting, you use paints and brushes. In sculpture, you use marble or wood or clay. And in other, you use words as your building blocks for word art. अब इसमें ये सब चीज़ें क्या हैं? Aesthetic, sentiment, feeling, imagination. They're all kind of unfamiliar. We don't think about them when we think about Islam. We think about God's commandments. Well, these branches of knowledge evolved because Muslims recognized that to truly, truly understand and reach the divine, you had to develop your inner being, not just your actions, not just your rational mind, but the things that really motivate us, right? Even in psychology, we know today that it is really our feelings and emotions and the chemicals that drive those feelings and emotions. Those are our true motivation for doing anything in life. This is an acknowledgement and a recognition of that reality of human nature. And developing and nurturing these inner faculties of how to use and how to teach your sentiments and how to put them towards a goal that is constructive rather than destructive. What is aesthetics? Let's take a little break here. Somebody tell me, what does the word aesthetics mean? Yes, adab is an umbrella term. Aesthetics का क्या मतलब है?
Like beauty.
What?
Beauty.
Yes, to do with beauty, but what is it? What about beauty? It's a field of knowledge, by the way. And in ancient Greek philosophy, it's an entire branch of philosophy.
Does it have to do with art and
Say it, okay. What do you think? Go on, Umair.
How you interpret certain art and literature?
Okay, thank you for bringing up that word, interpretation. Aesthetics or the human, and this is so look, adab and tasawwuf, kalam, falsafa, adab and tasawwuf are very, very important because all of these use the faculties of the human being that are particularly human. And it is particularly a human capability to recognize, feel, and be moved by beauty. So, and having an aesthetic sense is the ability to see, recognize, and be moved by beauty, to be emotionally moved by beauty. This is no different from you seeing a beautiful sunset at the beach, right? And for a few moments just being transported by it. That's your aesthetic sense acting. So, adab, which was many things, music also would have come into this, and fine arts. It was about using different types of arts to train the human heart to recognize and appreciate and feel beauty. Because until the human heart truly opens up to its ability to feel beauty, to be moved by beauty, by husn, without your heart being touched and moved by husn, you cannot live your life with ihsan. अब यहाँ पे imagination का क्या role है? There is a very important place attributed to imagination in pre-Islamic philosophy and knowledge. It is an entire realm inside your mind and above your mind called the Alam al-Khayal, the world of the imagination. Why? Because imagination, the ability to conceive of something that does not in fact exist in front of you, that is one of the highest ways in which human beings resemble God. Remember, the human being is meant to have been fashioned in the image of God. So how has he been fashioned in the image of God? Is it that God has 2 hands and 2 feet? No, it is the inner human being who is fashioned in the image of God. The inner human being who is capable of the kind of love that God is capable of, the kind of beauty God is capable of creating, and this ability to imagine something that doesn't exist and then bring it into existence. The creativity of the human being. So creativity and the ability to create beautiful things was considered a form of worship, one of the highest forms of worship. Okay, are these chats or are these? Yes, I like the chat. Okay. All right. Now, we're back to the circle. We are going to do the circle in many, many, many ways. It's very helpful, and it was very helpful conceptually to Muslims always. And by the way, Muslims love their geometry. Geometry is one of the things they really developed to a high science and a fine art. Close your eyes and think for a moment about like what comes to your mind when you think Islamic art, especially when it's the decoration on buildings. It's all geometry, complex geometry. Remember tehqiq? Tehqiq is something we as human beings do. Tehqiq is the process of looking for and finding haqq. Today, in modern Arabic and modern Urdu, tehqiq means research. So here are a bunch of fields of knowledge, part of the classical Islamic canon. And you could be a specialist in any one, right? And that would be your point of departure on the circumference of the circle. And you're all trying to get to haqq. So the Shia concept of imamat also falls on this circle, for instance, right? Another point to remember, I'm not going to belabor it, is that there was also a very holistic conception of knowledge, that all knowledge branches are related to each other because all of them are trying to get to the same thing, right? All of them ultimately have the same purpose. which means that it would be really dumb to focus so much, hyper focus so much on one area of knowledge that you totally ignore all other areas of knowledge. It would have felt like cutting one of your limbs off. I have some questions. Yes, Sarim?
Sorry, but can you explain? I understood all the circles, but there is Quran and Sunnah. So
Ah.
is this a circle? I got a bit confused in that.
Because they're in their circle, right? They're the closest that you're going to get to an actual expression of haq. Imagine them as being the outer part of the circle that everybody has to cross through.
So it like from whatever point you start, you must go through the Quran or the
Yeah,
Sunnah.
you can't ignore. Yeah, you can't ignore it.
Okay, got it.
Okay, Sarah.
I might be wrong, but last time when you showed us a circle that included the Vedic religion.
आ जाएगा देखो वो भी हो सकता है. Look at the issues. If you understand the logic of the circle and you understand the logic of the blind man and the elephant parable, you will understand that it can be extended indefinitely.
Okay, so this circle and that circle is kind of the same thing.
Okay. So if all knowledge is holistic and related to each other, that means they all have their place and their use and some truth in them. So here you come back to thinking about the different branches of knowledge as the different parts of the elephant. Many, as I told you, many of the early Ahle Hadith were also the early Sufis, because the early path of Tasawwuf was considered the path of the living Sunnah. Not the written Sunnah, but the actual practices that had been taught by Muhammad to Ali and then Ali onwards, from person to person. So this importance of teaching from living person to living person came to define tasawwuf more than any other branch of Islamic knowledge, because for them, since the knowledge they were teaching was heart knowledge and experiential knowledge, it just couldn't be done alone and with books. You had to do it with and through a master. Every Sufi order or silsila, except one, traces its shajra or spiritual lineage back to Ali, although they're considered Sunni. Okay, this is worth looking at. Why do we keep talking of Islamic tradition? What is it? What is a tradition? If there was so much development of new thought in Islamic history and so much difference of opinion amongst Muslims, then how can we point to one Islamic tradition? Well, because of this, right? Because there was exchange and overlap and this belief that all knowledge was holistic. So each one tied in with another. All right. That was a lot of broad background to what we really need to understand, which is the role of tasawwuf in the development of Muslim culture in South Asia. We already know that the actual spread of Islamic belief in South Asia took place not because of Islamic conquests, but because of the arrival of many Sufi masters who spread out across the subcontinent and lived and taught amongst local people. हम इसको सूफी इज़म इसलिए नहीं कहेंगे क्योंकि वो इज़म लगा के हम इसको इसके अपने डब्बे में बंद कर देते हैं, और अगर हम इसको एक अलग सूफी इज़म के डब्बे में बंद कर देंगे तो हम इसको इस्लाम से कट ऑफ कर देते हैं, which we do not want to do. Tasawwuf is one of the major streams of Islamic tradition. It's not a single stream, but it's like a multi-pronged stream. It's this river which just kept expanding and expanding the way a river does when it's coming, down towards the bay. So tasawwuf is probably, if we look at it in terms of centuries and numbers, the most important stream of Islamic tradition. It can also be referred to as faqiri, which you get a lot in the Persian and Indian languages, or tariqa, which just means path or way, but became a word to specifically talk about the Sufi path, tariqa or tariqat. We've done this, right? That Sufis trace their path back to Muhammad himself. And in fact, their view is that the core of Muhammad was Muhammad the Sufi. All right. Now, what is this discourse of beauty and love? What are these concepts and why are they so important? Well, to start off with, of course, the concept of ihsan and husn and the concept of love are intimately related. Why? Because beauty inspires love. So it is the catalyst. The discourse or language of love emerged with the developing practices of tarbiyah, tazkiyah, and ihsan. Now you have this in the ihsan slides I've already given you, but I'll go over it for a moment here. I sadly don't have it here. So many of you will not be really familiar with these terms, but in pre-modern Islam, the development and training and education of a human being took place on 3 levels simultaneously. जो सबसे बाहर का लेवल है ना, जो सबसे ज़ाहिरी लेवल है, वो तालीम का लेवल है, where you are taught the right and wrong things to do and not to do, and the basics of reading, writing, the forms of namaz, everything very external. That is talim. It's the most superficial level of education and training. After talim, at one level deeper, comes tarbiyat. Tarbiyah in Arabic, tarbiyat in Urdu because we pronounce the ta marbuta. तरबियत क्या होती है? कोई मुझे बता सकता है तरबियत क्या होती है? तरबियत का क्या मतलब?
Upbringing.
Sorry, Sarim?
Upbringing.
अच्छा, upbringing, values. Okay. Yes, that's what it means to us. Upbringing and values. True. How do you teach a child values? Imitation, showing, role modeling, practicality, है ना? कितने modern तरीके हैं ये तरबियत को define करने के. That is all true. But what is the purpose of tarbiyat? The purpose of talim is to provide practical worldly knowledge to a growing human of all kinds. The purpose of tarbiyat is to train and nurture the human heart. To train and nurture the human heart to actually feel the higher emotions, to feel compassion, to feel consideration, to crave and believe in justice, to know how to love all of other God's creations. That's the purpose of tarbiyah. That's why one of the values you will be taught is don't harm another person, right? Or things like don't steal. What is it ultimately about? It's ultimately about genuinely caring in your heart about justice and not causing harm. Tazkiya means purification. It is the deepest of the levels of human training. This is the purification of the soul or the nafs, your core being, which probably, there's a lot of overlap between the heart and the soul, the concept of the heart and the soul in Islamic knowledge. But there is this core soul that is your most fundamental self, which is the self into which God breathed divine light and gave you life. Everything else grows around that little kernel. So that soul, which is your core, your nafs, ultimately, the true nurture and training and education of a human being is learning how to purify that nafs or that soul. And that is tazkiyah. So, all the rational sciences and basic education in language and mathematics, that is part of talim. Adab and falsafa are part of tarbiyat, teaching you how to not be and act, but feel like a human being, feel like a true human being, and then act from that feeling of being a true human being. And then tasawwuf is the science of tazkiyah that teaches you how to purify your soul or your nafs. There are three types of nafs as such, and we will not get into that right now. Okay. You know these words, they're ubiquitous, they come up all the time, they're like part of everyday language. The Urdu word mohabbat comes from the Arabic word hub. Ishq is an Arabic word, and then it's in Farsi and it's in Turkish and it's in Urdu. Ishtiyaq comes from the same root, it means longing. Why do we use this discourse or this? Why do we use this metaphor of love to talk about the human soul and the relationship of the human soul to the divine? Any thoughts? Anyone have a sense of why we use this language? G. Sarin.
I'm not sure, but I think it's because he created us out of love. Because he, as it's written in the Quran, he loves us and he created us out of love. I'm not sure if this was the thing he created us out of the love of the Prophet when he created him. I'm not sure about this.
Well, there is such a narrative, but sure. Iman, haven't heard from you today.
Yeah, so one of the names of God is Al Wadud, which means the most loving. So we know that to love is one of the attributes of our Creator, and it's only when we have that love in return that we can, strive in His path, and we can then move towards Tazkiyah, and then we can do things to gain His pleasure. Because if we don't have that concept of love, and if all we have is, let's say, fear, so we wouldn't have that motivation that's required to, for that self purification and effort.
That's right. So, as you can see from the slide, which I won't read out to you, it is the name that is given to the motivation or the fuel, the thing that powers the human being to strive to be better. And it's very important to remember that in Islamic discourse, love is not a sweet, gentle, passive emotion, the way that the English word makes it sound. Ishq, ishq it is a very powerful, even destructive force Okay, it is closer to the Vedic concept of Shakti. Ishq is divine force. It's all consuming. Yes, that's right. Love is the breath in our hearts that allows us to feel uplifted by the beauty of a kind deed or the miraculous colors of a rainbow or anything else. Just come to the left of the screen for a moment. Just as the person who submits जो इस्लाम लाता है वो मुस्लिम होता है, जो ईमान लाता है वो मोमिन होता है, और जो ihsan से ज़िंदगी जीता है वो मुहसिन होता है. Right? So the Muslim obeys and worships him, ibadat. The muhsin sees God's husn and falls in love with him. So he is not doing ibadat. He's gone several steps higher and is doing muhabbat. There'll be a lot of quoting from Rumi because he is the most important Sufi poet of Islamic history. Love is that flame which, when it blazes up, burns away everything except the subsistent beloved. Love drives home the sword of no God. यहाँ ये क्या कह रहे हैं? La ilah. I hope everybody knows the literal word by word meaning of La ilaha illallah. La ilah means no God with a little g. Love drives home the sword of La ilah in order to slay illallah. Other than God is illallah. Look closely. After La ilah, what remains? Nothing remains except illallah. The rest has gone. Sufis have always meditated on this basic line of the Shahada. For them, it is deeply philosophical in meaning. And unlike most of us who will focus on the illallah, they have a great focus on the first half, la ilah, because that is really what the Sufi path consists of in all its early stages. What you are wanting to do or what your purpose is as you are on the Sufi path is the purification or tazkiyah of the nafs. But how do you do that? You do that by carefully and systematically getting rid of your worldly self and your worldly associations and attachments. So for the Sufi philosopher, that God with a little g are all those attachments that the human being has. If your life is primarily motivated by the ambition for professional success, that ambition is your God. You need to get rid of it if you want to find illallah. If your life is run by the need to defeat all your enemies and gain revenge on people who were bad to you, that obsession for revenge becomes your little god with a G. But those gods with a little G, which live inside us, which are our feelings, aren't always necessarily so obviously bad. You know, what's wrong with wanting to be successful in life? What's wrong, according to Sufi philosophy, is that it must not be the thing that motivates you minute to minute in your living daily existence. Because as soon as something becomes your prime motivator in your daily existence, then it becomes a god for you. So to really be a true Muslim mu'min and muhsin, you have to recognize all the gods with a little g that live inside your heart, and you have to destroy them. And that first goal of destroying all these gods with a little g is called fana. When you have achieved total fana or annihilation of your worldly self and your worldly motivations, then you have purified and freed your essential self. That's when you're really ready to see and experience the reality of God, which is called baqa, to abide in the divine because your soul has been freed of its worldly constraints. Complete union or meeting with the divine essence is visal. Visal, the opposite, which is the state that we are all born in, that you and I live in right now, is the state of firaq, being separated from the divine. I'm sure many of you know this, but it brings this home nicely, the little fact. I'm sure you've all heard of the fact that an annual festival at a major Sufi shrine is always called an urs. In Arabic, the word urs means wedding. So why is the death anniversary of a Sufi saint called a wedding? Because it is only on his death that he achieves his final purpose, which is final and ultimate union with his beloved. His soul is finally released and is one with God. Hence, it is the wedding night. We've had a lot of questions on this. Here's the development. In the early days, the path of love was something that individuals practiced as a matter of personal piety or personal search or tahqiq. Over the years, out of the popularity and the teachings of some of the early Sufis, these paths crystallized into institutional Sufi orders or silsilas. A silsila is literally a chain, and in English we call a silsila an order, which means an official group that forms for a special purpose and has formal rituals and particular teachings. The difference between Sufi silsilas is mainly in who is considered the founding master or the sheikh or the pir, and also in their particular practices. The master is called by many names. The common ones are sheikh, pir, murshid. And the most common name for a disciple, somebody who comes to learn from the master, is murid. मुरीद भी कई किस्म के होते हैं. कुछ कैजुअल मुरीद्स होते हैं जो बस मानने वाले होते हैं, who come to on special occasions just to get some blessings from the saint, who ask the saint to pray for them. And then there are officially inducted murids who want to be part of the silsila. वो मुरीद को बैत देते हैं. ये वही बैत है जो रसूलुल्लाह को दी गई थी, जो खुलफाए राशिदून को दी गई थी. It means vote of allegiance, and it's the same word and it comes from the same history. So a proper murid pledges his allegiance in the form of bayat or bayah to the sheikh. And then the training or the tarbiyat of the murid begins within a Sufi order's particular methods and rules. The chain of the teachings is carried on by murids. Those of the murids who gain the highest spiritual ranks are then designated as khalifa or successor of their sheikh. Please don't confuse this khalifa with Hazrat Abu Bakr as khalifa. It's the same word. In Arabic, the word khalifa just means successor. But when we're talking about Islamic history and Islamic society, there is a line of political khalifas, and then within tasawwuf, there are the successors to Sufi sheikhs who are called khalifas. जब वो खुद शेख बन जाते हैं तो फिर वो खलीफा नहीं रहते, फिर वो एक और अपने नीचे एक खलीफा अपॉइंट करते हैं. All right, that was a lot of information. I'm going to stop there for now and take some questions. Umair, la means no. Yeah, that's correct. So the Shahada is divided into two parts. Yes. La ilah. Ilah means God with a little g, any God, right? La ilah, no God. Il means except or but. Allah, except Allah. La ilaha illallah. The Shahada, the first part of the Shahada itself is two parts. Muhammadur Rasulullah pe to khair koi jagah nahi hai na. But the real part of the Shahada for certainly the Sufi philosopher, is meditating on what La ilaha illallah means. Why put it that way, right? There are many ways in which it could be put. Why say there is no God but God? You could say there is only one God, you are the product of the one God, or so many things. But the formula of the Shahada is La ilaha illallah. That ilaha is God with a little g. And in the interpretations of the philosophers and the Sufis, those little gods with the little g aren't, it's too easy to say that, oh, Ganesh ki murti, I don't believe in that. Of course I believe La ilaha illallah. Or, you know, when Moses came down from the mountain and he found his community worshipping the image of a golden calf. It's not about those idols. I mean, those are children's stories. They're metaphorical. Truly and deeply, when you delve into it, as did all thinking Muslims, you realize that it is about all the things that we allow to have power over us. What is a God? A God is something or a being or a concept which we believe has power over us, can tell us what to do. So all our overriding motivations and feelings and biases inside our hearts that actually motivate us to live our lives, those are our gods with a small g. Negation of all other gods is necessary, right? But which gods? It's very easy to negate gods that are made of clay, you know? It's not about that. It's about the little gods that live within us, about the little gods that motivate us, the feelings that we allow ourselves to be ruled by. If we are ruled by ambition, ambition is our God. If we are ruled by revenge, revenge is our God. You know, if we are ruled by nationalism, nationalism is our God. So La ilaha illallah is to rise above all those worldly human motivations and feelings. Yes, Iman, worldly things and worldly feelings, right? Motivations that we center our lives around. If I'm going on and on talking about feelings like ambition, revenge, nationalism, these feelings are to be defeated so that we can rise above them and feel only love, a very selfless love. Through Bear, the master also gives blessings to his murids. Yes, there are many ways in which a Sufi sheikh gives blessings, and it depends on what level of murid you are, and therefore what kind of blessing you will get. What about love for people or only love for God? It's a very good question. It's universal love. if your heart becomes capable of feeling selfless love, it is going to feel selfless love in the same unitary way that God does. If you love God, you have to love God's creation, which means people and everything else. That is why you would slaughter an animal with love, with ihsan and beauty, because you have love and respect for the goat as God's creation. Um, to be an environmentalist is to live your life with love for God. Does this involve necessarily ridding ourselves of our worldly sentiments into the greater scheme of universal love? Doing worldly things but with ihsan? Yes, yes. Our love of God needs to be selfless. Yes. He comes before anything else. Yes, but you see, it's very easy to also make love of God into a small God. And this is one of the things that Sufi poets love criticizing other Muslims for. People who think and act very pious, that, you know, we are God-fearing people and our entire lives are lived in obedience to God, that showing off of their piety becomes a small God in their lives. So it's quite complicated. Is one feeling love to be dominant over other feelings even attainable? I don't know. I'm not a Sufi sheikh, neither are you. I'm just telling you what the teachings are. And they say it is, but it takes a hell of a lot of work and a long, long time. It's not easy. What would be lack of ikhlas, Mahnoor? Mahnoor, would you like to speak?
Yes, so I was just saying that in response to what you just said, the Sufi poets criticize the people who show off their piety to other people rather than, so then your intention becomes medal, right? And ikhlas is purity, right? To whatever you're doing specifically and only for a Rizai Ilahi. So then that becomes medal.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. There is, in fact, a extreme tradition within tasawwuf of something called malamat. Does anybody know what that is? Malamat, malamti hona? Ji Huzaifa.
तो मलामती जो है वो इबादत वगैरह को मतलब नहीं दिखाना चाहते किसी को, क्योंकि वो समझते हैं कि अगर किसी मतलब नमाज पढ़ते हुए किसी ने देख लिया या उस तरह, तो ये भी एक किस्म की रियाकारी होगी, तो ये इखलास में जो है मिलावट हो जाएगी।
Bilkul. You see, so then it's a philosophy where people who genuinely just want to find God and dedicate their being to the love of God do not want other people to revere them too much as pious men. So they do things outwardly to repel people. They do weird things that are socially repellent. This is the philosophy that you will see amongst the Qalandar faqirs of Sindh, for instance, right? Roaming around dirty, not wearing clothes, not saying your prayers, gali galu. There's so many things, right? Drinking, smoking chairs. All of this is meant to put off the average person, to 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 invite blame and ridicule from society, so that society leaves you alone and doesn't sort of build you up into a minor god, because in your heart you're actually quite spiritual. This concept of universal love is also similar to ahimsa in Buddhism. In a way, absolutely. Ahimsa means non-violence towards all things. and it is about a deep-seated respect for life. The Islamic concept of muhabbat and ishq goes much further than that. As I said, it is not an emotion that can be limited to kindness or respect or affection. It's passion. It is first of all having the passion to destroy your worldly self, right? It's like a nuclear force. Do Sufi teachings focus on spirituality, or do they see love and spirituality as interchangeable? Not interchangeable, but intricately connected, right? आप फिर से डब्बे बना रहे हैं, डब्बे ना बनाओ. Guys, I'm taking questions because there are a lot of questions. However, no one needs to stay here. We're well out of time. I'm going to wait 1 minute. If there are people who'd like to chat a little, you may stay on and raise your hands, and everybody else is free to leave the meeting.